to what factors would you attribute the stark difference, the drop of BBM and the rise in Sara's figures?
Anyway, good evening, Sean and Pauline. So, what factors? One, I think the president is being held accountable for a number of deficiencies. This is seen largely in the administration's rating in addressing the most urgent concerns. If you look at the most urgent concern, that's controlling inflation or the high prices of basic commodities and services. The administration has been getting almost 8 out of 10 disapproval from December 2024. So in this case, what we can see is that this is a continuation of probably of the lack of appreciation of government's performance in that regard. We cannot also rule out the impact of political events, most especially the most recent one, the one that came preceding the survey, and this is the arrest of the former president, Rodrigo Duterte. The possibility that the narrative that has been spun by the Duterte camp, that the president was kidnapped, that due process was not in any way observed, and this is covered in a Reuters report in terms of the massive disinformation that has come about soon after the arrest. And this might have impact on public perception with regard to the trustworthiness of the president.
Will this then impact the elections? The senatorial slate of the administration may take a hit. If we recall, Ronald, noong I think midterm elections during Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's time, the administration slate did very poorly.
Well, it's a different context now when we talk about 2007 and in 2025. In 2007, definitely the administration of Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo was saddled with legitimacy issues that came about from the beginning from the supposed or alleged wholesale cheating in the 2004 elections. So that was a problem. Eventually, the politicians were essentially divided into two camps, one for the Arroyo camp, the Team Unity, and the other one for what was referred to as a genuine opposition. So it was a much more polarized election. And in that case, essentially, the opposition won, no? Because of, as I said, legitimacy question. In 2025, what we have is that we have an alliance, no, on the part of administration. It's an alliance among political parties. I think there are 5 political parties there. So the candidates can be regarded as basically belonging to political parties that are not ideologically different. But those political parties have their own bases. Let's say the Nationalist People's
Right.
Coalition, the Nationalist Party, I forgot the other parties in the coalition. But and these candidates can also run on their own. They're essentially nationally prominent senators that are trying to come back, incumbent senators for that matter. So they can do their campaign on their own, and we've seen how certain candidates from the alliance are actually breaking away from the joint campaign and trying to take on the campaign on their own individually, in tandem with prominent local candidates. So
But
they're
we
trying to
do
insulate
see,
them.
Ronald, if I may
Yeah.
interrupt, we do see PDP Laban candidates sneaking in the Magic 12. I mean, rising in the last surveys, in the last hour, so to speak.
And that's the difference between the Alianza, and the PDP Laban. The PDP Laban seem to be going at it more collectively, while the Alianza candidate, in order to insulate themselves from whatever would be the impact of the political turbulence caused by the rift between the Dutertes and the Marcos, they're basically walking on 2 legs. The joint Alianza campaign and their own individual initiatives. You don't see that in terms of the PDP Laban. They're a little bit more, as I said, more collective. They tend to present themselves. The PDP Laban itself doesn't have that many candidates. They just brought in guest candidates, right? And there are 10 of them. So it's more a collective campaign relative to, let's say, the Alianza. And that's the reason that I'm saying that administration candidates can really insulate themselves from whatever would be the backlash that the president is faced with, or the disapproval and distrust, majority disapproval and distrust
Okay.
that the president received.
And we are seeing that happening already, actually.
And
Yeah.
we've seen it happen in the past 2 weeks, and we're going to see it happen in the next 3 weeks, soon after the Holy Week break.
But if we can turn over to VP Sara's numbers, she was just really suffering a backlash months ago, and suddenly there was this upturn in her numbers.
The recovery actually happened in February when we saw BP Sara's numbers going back to a simple majority, both in terms of approval and fuss. And this was right after the impeachment case that was filed against her. What happened in February was that her approval, performance, and trust ratings actually increased in the Visayas. It was still less than a majority in the balance of Luzon and the National Capital Region. The reason for her increase in this March survey is really a further recovery in the Visayas, and a substantive increase in terms of approval and trust in the National Capital Region, which is a region where both Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte are actually garnered support in the last election. So she's back to majority approval in the National Capital Region. She moved up by 22 percentage points in the National Capital Region and 17 points in Visayas, and that accounts for the 7 percentage point increase in terms of her approval nationally, as well as in her trust rating for that matter, which is higher than her approval rating.
Okay, but Ronald, to go back to your point earlier, no, that this only could compare to somewhat dismal numbers back during PGMA's term. If I recall correctly, she got those terrible numbers towards the end of her term, and she actually sat for 9 years. Vis-a-vis President BBM now, pa-midterm pa lang tayo. In fact, wala pa nga yung midterm elections. How do you think this will impact or change, as the elections conclude, as the new Senate sits, and as that impeachment trial starts?
Well, Sean, what happened in the case of GMA was that her approval and trust ratings declined. Cess will probably remember this. Soon after the Hello Garcia scandal, right? And that was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, July 2005. And she was unable to recover from then on. So she was saddled with that legitimacy issue from 2005 until she bowed out in 2010. Her lowest approval and trust ratings were actually recorded towards the end of her term. But during the midterm, she had basically the same level of approval and trust as Bongbong Marcos, 25%. The difference is that she did not have majority approval and disapproval and distrust. Bongbong Marcos, at this point, has majority disapproval and distrust. So in a sense, they both suffered the same lack of appreciation and trust, but BBM is getting majority disapproval and trust compared to, let's say, a more divided public in 2007, in April 2007, or May 2007, in the case of GMA.
Okay, one other thing that stood out to me from the survey, and actually in all the analysis, this is actually, I think, might be a kind of a small note. I noticed that Martin Romualdez, the House Speaker, has a 94% awareness level, which is kind of high because in our previous interviews, you would say, normally hindi makilala ng tao yung House Speaker, or, that's why medyo mababa or hindi gumagalaw yung mga ratings nila. What do you make of that?
Well, when you ask people whether they have read, watched, or listened to anything in relation to House Speaker, and you give that particular position, the tendency of people would be to say, yes, we've read, watched, or listened to something that said about Ferdinand Martin Romualdez. But the level of awareness is superficial. No? The other thing that you should note also is that the Speaker of the House is a district representative. It's a district representative, and the district is just a small unit, in this case, in the Eastern Visayas. So he is not as popular as, let's say, senators, whose constituency would be national. We've had speakers that have the same ratings, where most speakers have undecided ratings, both for performance and trust, because people don't know them that much, and they'd rather not make a judgment in terms of their trustworthiness for that matter.
And di ba, Ronald, traditionally, hindi talaga popular ang posisyon ng House Speaker.
Yep. And we've done studies in the past where when you say people ask people, ano ba ang trabaho ng House Speaker? Ang lumalabas tagapagsalita, which is not actually the work of a House Speaker, right? The House Speaker is supposed to be the leader of the lower house of Congress, which is a more powerful house because it's the house that controls the purse. It's the house that actually deliberates on the budget first. So in that sense, the speaker is not necessarily known for the specific roles that he or she plays. And I remember there are only the speaker that got the first majority rating was, I think, Speaker Belmonte.
Yes.
Soon after he became speaker after the impeachment, and also during the time of Noynoy Aquino. So yeah, the other speaker who had majority ratings was Alan Cayetano, but Alan Cayetano is essentially bringing with him the national prominence that he has garnered over a period of time as senator, no? Before he slid down to the lower house.
And finally, Ronald, I mean, I remember you saying that sympathy cannot really be measured in surveys. And that was talking about, of course, Pulse Asia's latest senatorial preference survey. But here for the trust and approval ratings, is that something also that you would attribute the rise, the gains of Vice President Sara Duterte?
I would say to a certain extent there is some sympathy there because of the way that they have played out the arrest as a kidnapping. And then, you know, if you look at the imagery that the Vice President projected over the past few weeks, it's quite distinct from her behavior in the past year. There's calmness there. There's
Yes.
she goes to the
Yes.
audience. She speaks in a very calm tone.
Yes.
So in that
Very
in that
noticeable.
Case, in that case,
180.
that might, you know, that's semiotics. No, you try to interpret images, visuals, language. It's quite distinct. It differentiates itself from how she used to behave. Remember when she was in the house, she did not even want to take the oath. But she's not as abrasive, no, at this point. And maybe I don't know whether that is who she really is, but definitely the behavior has changed across the last few months compared to what has happened, for example, which brought about, of course, one of the items in the impeachment case.
She is paying attention to your surveys. We thank you for your time, Pulse Asia Research President Ronald Holmes.